This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many, many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today I'm honored to have Faisal Hoque on the show, and he is a serial entrepreneur. He's the founder of SHADOKA and NextChapter. He's also the author of some best-selling books, including Everything Connects and Lift, and another book that's coming out next year, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit. We'll see whether we get into that. But I am just honored to have him on to help us talk a little bit about some of the things that leaders need to focus on when it comes to creativity, innovation, mindfulness, and how to be the best leader that we can be for our team and those that look up to us. Anyway, with all that being said, Faisal, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor is all mine. Thank you.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today in your career and what that journey's been like.
So look, I mean, your show is for the techies. I'm a techie. I started my career as a R&D engineer. In college, I studied electrical engineering and computer science and management science, and so I started in that R&D route. And then, I started working for Pitney Bowes, which is at that time very R&D centric. And then I went to work for Dun & Bradstreet. And then right after that, I started my first tech company. And then once I started my tech company, this is where all the, basic leadership and management skills or lack thereof hit me up hard because I was very young. I was in my early 20s. And then from there, I have had several companies that I've built from scratch. Some did extremely well, some miserably failed, and here I am. And so 20 years ago, I started writing about organizational change and management, and that increasingly got into this, this stuff about mindfulness and empathy and other very critical skill set that we don't necessarily talk about, especially if you come from science and technology background. So I kind of like dabble between, the intersection of humanity and science and technology when I talk about, the leadership style, management style, and growing and scaling organization. And I have had, I've been very fortunate to work with some of the very large organizations, both in the private sector as well as in public sector. So I've seen gamuts of things, some good, some bad, and some work, some don't work. So here I am.
Awesome. And, I know I've said this on the show probably more than a dozen times, but empathy, you mentioned that before. And that's one of the things that I've struggled with. And I've realized that I've got to be very intentional about my empathy. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've seen this a lot in tech leaders too, where, you're focused so heavily on, either code or development or the project or the product that you're building that you forget that there's a people side of that. And you forget that every person that you're going to be either affecting with your project or your product or that's helping out has a story and is a life behind that as well. How have you seen this empathetic approach kind of affect the projects that you've worked on?
Look, I mean, it's for me, it has been an evolution process. When I was in my early 20s, I was a very driven tech entrepreneur who had early on pretty big successes where I was able to raise a lot of money and fund my ideas. And I got very, like you just said, it's very science, black and white driven. What I realized, and then it kind of all crashed and burned, and I got fired from my own company.
Oh man.
What I realized right after that is that the human element of things are so very important, because the motivation and inspiration, as much as a lot of technology people are driven by new things and creating new things, it's really comes we work much better when we connect with people and we can inspire and influence them, right? So but human beings are very much always about self-preservation mode. It doesn't matter what field you're in, and then when you add these very logical thinking process, it becomes even harder to practice empathy, right? So you have to almost consciously practice empathy, and we all have good days and bad days, and we all have struggles of many kinds, right? Rich, poor, technical, non-technical, early stage career, later stage career, different race, background, it doesn't matter. Every single one of us have some stories and some struggles. So when you're leading people, it requires you to consciously be aware that people are going through whatever they're going through, and you have to kind of very, very consciously measure how you communicate what you're trying to communicate, and be aware of whatever they're doing, and when they're succeeding and when they're failing, when they're struggling, right? So that requires conscious practice, and that conscious practice, by the way, starts with mindfulness. Another topic that you wanted to talk about. I mean, mindfulness is being aware of the present moment at a very fundamental level. So you have to be, when you and I are talking about at this particular moment, for me, nothing else matters. This conversation is the most important thing. And if I don't treat it that way, I won't be empathetic of what you're trying to ask me, nor I'll be empathetic of how am I answering it, so that it connects to the audience that you're trying to convey this message to. So this practice of mindfulness is kind of enabler of empathy and gratitude, which allows you to kind of influence and inspire other people, not to mention yourself.
Yeah. So you kind of hinted on transparency a little bit. We'll come back to that in a second. But when it comes to mindfulness, have you seen, like with Zoom and Teams and a lot more remote work happening nowadays, that it's a little bit harder for people to be present? I know, like when I'm in a conference room in a meeting, it's difficult to not be present, because you're there, people see you face to face. If you're looking at your phone the whole time, it's pretty obvious. But on a Teams meeting, someone could have another window open. It gets really distracting sometimes, and it's difficult to know if someone's really focusing on this call or if they're focusing on their next call.
Yeah, I think in a remote situation is difficult, but and pandemic kind of highlighted this more than ever. But I mean, if you're in the tech space, most of us who have been in the industry for a long time always had remote workforce, right? Because people work in different time zones, and you're managing global projects, whatever. And I mean, you can tell that when somebody is distracted, because you can hear in their voice, right? So as a leader, you have to be conscious, and maybe you need to stop the conversation and regroup. If it's video on, then you will see their eye movement.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there have other windows open and whatnot, so you can see the eyes are just going all over the place. But I mean, what I try to do is that when I start a meeting, I always say that, are we ready? And by ready, meaning that please shut down everything else and let's just focus on this. That's one point. I also try to do meetings that are not more than 20 minutes long, because once you get beyond that, that's when you start losing people. So I try to set very specific agenda and very specific topics, and not everything can be accomplished in 20 minutes, but you can break it down in 20 minutes CASP and use that 20 minutes on a focused conversation and take a break or something, or have another meeting later on, and stay very focused, right? So those little things does help, but it's not easy, and in a remote situation, especially people who hasn't had a lot of management experience, they don't always pick up on the fact that other people are distracted and kind of pull that back and reset, and regroup.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've noticed is sometimes you'll have the camera on, you'll be talking to someone, and you'll see like their face brighten up and then darken and brighten, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
you're flipping through windows. You got
Mm-hmm.
a black background and a white background going on there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's
Yes, indeed.
important to go back to transparency. And whenever you have someone that you feel is disengaging from the conversation or from the meeting, is to find a way to bring them back in. And being transparent about it is one of the ways that I found as a leader to try to encourage that engagement.
Yeah, and you can always do some basic touch base by saying, like at a personal level, how is their day going? Are they okay, right? So, and if you have a good enough relationship, they will tell you, no, I'm not feeling well today, or I'm distracted about my mom being sick, or my son being sick, or whatever the case may be. They will share that with you, right? And as leader, you need to be conscious about it and cut them the slack they need, because we're not always 100% all the time. I mean, we all have good days and bad days, and it's okay. And I also have a practice that I do whereby I try to manage progress versus people. So it's not about is somebody punching in 8 hours a day, or are they on all the time. That's not the measurement of progress, right? Measurement of the progress is that, are you really getting things done as you predicted? And if you're not getting it done, why you're not getting it done? And as a leader, you're supposed to help them figure out why they're stuck, right? And being stuck is not always being stuck with because you're technically not getting it done. Maybe it's something else, right? So you almost have to take that role of a listener and a enabler and a mentor, and to a certain extent psychologist, right? So that you can kind of bring them together.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to talk about, is to have that trust where people can tell you, like, that I'm stuck, and not feel like they're letting you down. And sometimes it takes a while to build those kind of relationships. Especially if you're new, like a new boss, and nobody wants to disappoint their new boss, right? So it's going to take a little bit of time for them to get to that point where an employee will come to you and say, "Man, I'm just struggling today."
Yeah, and the easiest way to build relationship when you tell your story to other people, good and bad, right? So if you are open to sharing the things that you struggle with, people are more easily to open up and share their stories where they're struggling, right? That's the human bond, right? So then it kind of breaks the barrier between ranks and files, right? Because I mean, we're all human, right? So we all have struggles, and some of us are good at something, some of us are bad at, and other people are better at something, right? And then we have these this life struggle, right? So when you share those kind of stories and you create a common bond, and that common bond kind of keeps people together. People get to see you that you may be the boss, but you too are a human, and you too have drawbacks and issues and struggles that you're trying to get through. So that common bond comes comes from that kind of sharing more than anything else. I mean, yes, you can go and go out to lunch and have a good time and have happy hours, but those are kind of a superficial bond. These very human life struggle shares are much more deeper.
Yeah. So what's the way that we can start those conversations? Because it's really awkward if I just go up to someone and say, "Hey, I'm I failed at this thing and I struggle here." But what's a way that we can naturally try to evoke those type of conversations?
Look, I mean, there is you can kind of trigger it, you can trigger by saying, like when I meet somebody, right, for the first time, obviously, it's like in a first meeting, people are not going to blur out everything about their lives, but you can start by saying, hey, listen, tell me some of the things that really excites you, but tell me also some of the things that scares you, right? Or tell me some big success you had, but also tell me some failures you have. And you can just not, it's not just asking them, but you can also kind of respond back to them by sharing the same thing that you're asking them, right? So that's a conversation starter, and then within few months, you'll start seeing people, kind of bonding with you and share more and more, like with you. I mean, it happens, right? So I mean, you don't have to be everybody's friend, but you have to have a common human bond, right? So and that doesn't happen without having those kind of common understanding of where the other person's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, I've worked on enough projects that have failed to have a lot of good stories. And whenever we're starting a project, usually you try to brainstorm and figure out ideas. I like to talk about, start out just by saying, here's one of the, I worked on a project similar to this, and this is how it failed. This is how it went on. Here's some of the mistakes that I've made. And let them know that I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. And I'm, more than open to share my mistakes with you. So, and try to start out by, I wouldn't say like putting myself down, but not talking about my wins as much as I am talking about my failures, so that people realize that even if I'm the boss.
And there's a fine balance, right? Because you can also want to share with them what worked and how you kind of how you overcome when there is a adversity or things didn't quite turn out the way it's supposed to, right? So it's not an all self-deprecation process. You kind of have to give them a lesson, from your own lesson. And and often, by the way, when you do talk about your lessons, it's helpful to yourself as much as the people that you're working with, right?
Yes.
Because you can rethink and kind of reiterate what went wrong but also what worked.
You can also talk about like the lessons that you learned, to sometimes be grateful for those things. I know for me, I look back on certain projects where like it was, not a good project. It didn't go very well. It was a lot of extra work. We underscoped it, or and then you realize that, because of that failure on that smaller scale, now when I get to a project that's similar on a larger scale, I've learned some lessons, and I can be very grateful for that, experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's you're right on. I mean, you do have to kind of be grateful for the lessons, right? I mean, and there's lessons everywhere if you want to take those, right? So, and and lessons also comes from diverse diversity, meaning it's diversity not just from I mean the classical diversity of race and background and whatnot, but it's also diversity of experience, right? So you want to hear those and you want to apply that for current and future situations.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think diversity is extremely important, not just in people, which is also very important, but also just in like things that you've worked on in the past. And when I was graduating college, they used to talk about how if you're going to go into banking, you need to stay only in the financial industry. Don't venture off. All your experience has to be there. But I found out just by personal experience. I've worked for educational institutions. I've worked for media. I've worked for entertainment. I've worked for technology companies, and I think having different ways of looking at things is very helpful when it comes to problem solving, and that's a big part of what we do. We have to be creative. We have to solve problems and be innovative, especially in tech.
For sure. I mean, there's a term that we used in my book, Everything Connects, called intentionally omnivorous. And the idea comes from actually from the food industry, where one of the chefs, and I'm a big foodie, and I liked, looking at how people comes up with these, very creative dishes. And one of the chefs uses this term called intentionally omnivorous. And the idea is that if you want to create something new or different or of your own, then you have to kind of experience the different taste and the feel and the texture and the smell, and only then you can come up with your something new and different. So it goes back to what you just said, that and I've done this throughout my entire career, where I work for different industries, and I had a unique opportunity because I built my companies, and the company worked for many different industries. And like a few years ago, one of the areas that I've never worked on before is the complex federal government that our government has, meaning the U.S. government has. So for last 4+ years, I've been trying to help our government by bringing on the private sector experience. But as a result, I have learned a tons about how complex government agencies work or doesn't work, or how you have to navigate the bureaucracy and the policies, along with the technology complexity that you often don't see in the private sector, right? So it's very important to be able to learn from these different experience bases and be completely open-minded, learning, not just bringing whatever you're bringing to the table, but also learning from the new situation that you're encountering. So those are all hallmark of basic leaderships, that every one of us need to kind of embrace. Otherwise, you can't lead and certainly not create something new, different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you're looking at all the way from the government perspective, and some of the red tape you have to go through there, especially, and flip that over to the startup side. I know for me it was life-changing, because every project we had to do when I worked for our state government had to go through an RFP process. You had to get a committee together, all these things. And then I got a job for a tech company, which it wasn't a small one, but it was just like, you have X number of thousands of dollars, go spend it, and get the right people. You make the decision. You don't have a committee. You just
Right.
Like, I can just hire its company to do this. I don't have to get an RFP. I don't have to.
Yeah. And both of this situation has pros and cons, right? So because as the companies gets bigger, that kind of people do need structure, right? And but people also need freedom. This is another thing we talked about in both almost all of my books, because it's there's a paradox. It's a paradox, right? But the balance between the structure and the freedom is where you get the best outcome, and that's also goes back to the leadership style that inspire and influence, because you can inspire, but if you want to scale, that's when you need the process and you need the structure, right? So that's where the dichotomy comes in play repeatedly.
Okay. Yeah. And I know, like, for me, I was thinking about, the importance of having those structures that you're talking about in place. And, I've had some people complain about, oh, you don't want this big institution. You want to be nimble. You want to think like a startup. I said, yeah, you want to think like a startup, but, we as people put institutions in place for good reasons. If you think back to the medical institution that we have today, back, a couple hundred years ago, we had one doctor in your neighborhood. That was your neighborhood doctor. And they would go to your house when you were sick, and they would take care of you. But if something happened to that doctor, then the whole town is screwed. But having an institution that we put in place with multiple doctors, called a hospital, and a hospital system, then we have the ability to kind of navigate through those storms and have the ability to take care of those doctors when they're sick. And it just is better for the group as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, and take that concept even farther. Think about the patient information, right? So let's say, that patient information needs to survive beyond the immediate care provider. Otherwise, when you need the specialist, how do you access that information? And think about the emergency cases where you're just ended up in a hospital, and somebody needs to know what you have or don't have, and what you're allergic to, or what are your preconditions. Otherwise, you'll be in a pretty bad situation, right? So it goes, so going back to your notion of process and scalability and whatnot. I mean, think about where tech has come today, and because of tech industry has always been very nimble, I mean, we don't always think about the ramification of technology, right? So now, especially now with the new era that we're entering with the fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence and machine learning and all this stuff, and you can argue how much good or bad social media has done in last 5 to 10 years, when all those startups really didn't think through any of this, right? So now, because of the complexity, even a startup has a moral obligation to think through those things, which only comes from having some sort of established process and ability to kind of do future analysis on ethical ramification and go about it in that way, right? So you just all nimble tech is not always good for us, and you have to kind of handle this in a way that has a positive impact, not negative impact, right? So things has gotten much more complicated as we advance technology and the utilization of technology as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at like the Social Dilemma documentary where they talk about some of that stuff and how you didn't really think through the psychological impacts of some of the things that we're doing in tech. But there is a bleed over, there's a cost that gets paid, somewhere down the line. And even with crypto, that was a big thing. Now we have this environmental impact that's happening that may have not been thought through.
Absolutely. I mean, you can argue about that in every single tech sector, right? So I mean, look at EVs, right? The impact of these batteries that have we are trying to push the longevity of the battery. It is a huge environmental impact, which ironically is the argument for EV, right? So so it's not as simple. The things are not as simple and straightforward. And I think we have much bigger, just because you can invent something doesn't mean it's ready to be commercialized, right? So that we have to think through that much more cautiously than we ever had.
Yeah, for sure. I think now one of the things that when you're getting into this growth that we have, when we build something and we start out with this kind of entrepreneurial mindset or this quick, what was Facebook's old slogan? Break things quickly or something like that. I don't know. Move fast and break things or something. And then we want to get into the process of standardizing, and sometimes we that pendulum swings too far and we over process things. Right. And that's where digital transformation kind of comes back in to kind of figure out what that correct process is and stabilize that. What are some of the things that you're seeing as companies try to navigate those waters of determining what's enough process and what's too much and things like that?
Look, I mean, I'll try to break it down in a with an analogy. I because of my origin, I was, I'm a big believer of the Asian philosophies, and there's a saying, if you want to make music, the string can be too loose or string cannot be too tight, then it breaks, right? So what I mean by that is that you cannot underestimate the humanity and the impact of humanity and the involvement of the human element when you are utilizing technology and when you are coming up with processes, right? I mean, we don't want to overburden people with process, nor we don't want to have any process so people can do whatever they want to do, right? So it is about balance, and this balance comes from looking at like looking at things holistically and getting everybody involved holistically, and then decide what's the right amount of process and technology for each situation, versus just saying, hey, this looks like great stuff and let's just implement it and let's figure it out later. I mean, projects and initiative fails repeatedly exactly because of like tech for tech's sake and the notion of efficiency, but you really don't gain efficiency. You have actually boggled down people because you have just overloaded them with all kind of things that was not necessary, right? So it's that balance is what's makes or breaks this notion of process and technology implementation.
Yeah, I think it's and sometimes it's difficult to take that step back and figure out that balance because you're so invested in the solution that you wanted or that you fought for, and then you realize that maybe I'm overdoing this a little bit, and it's hard to back up because you don't want that sense of failure or that you don't want to eat crow if you messed up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, see, a mature and confident leader will yield back, when it's necessary. When you may be very successful leader doesn't mean and the definition of success is in the eye of the beholder, right? So, but but a mature, conscious leader will yield back and bring kind of bring people together and reset the course when it's necessary, regardless whether it's their baby or not, but that's where that human skill comes in play, right? So I mean, I have repeatedly argued and talked about, even though I'm a technologist, I build and sell technology products, right? So I repeatedly argued that the next generation skill is going to be about these things where we start our conversation. It's about being mindful and empathy, having that empathy and having a conscious approach, how we treat each other, but also how we treat our customer, and then in a broader context, how we treat our community and our planet in general, right? So we have to be very much conscious about it, and it is also our role as citizens of Globe to point out when leaders don't do that, and you can't blindly follow whatever when by charismatic leaders when they preach something and it's not right, so it's our responsibility to step up and argue against it.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you're talking about with mature leaders, that we've got to be able to set that precedence that if we do mess up, we've got to allow people the freedom to speak out against us without repercussion, without negativity. And I think it's where one-on-ones come in place, and like having those regular, consistent conversations and the ability to let people say what they need to say and get it off their chest and call you out on things if you mess up, and let people know that that's what you want to grow too. You want to improve yourself as a leader. And in order to do that, I need you to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Because sometimes I have blinders on. Sometimes I can't see, what's right in front of me. So I need you as my peer or my direct report to tell me when I mess up so that I can correct course.
Look, I mean, one way to think about this, I mean, if you start considering everybody as your colleague and a collaborator versus as somebody who works for you, things looks very differently, right? Because you may be a leader, but that's just your role, right? It's a persona that you take on at that particular moment, but you can allow other people to lead too. So, for example, I'll use a tech example. I mean, you don't want if you are not a UI expert, you don't want to start telling, override your UI expert how things should look, right? You want that person to lead, and you want to give your critique as an end user what works for you and doesn't work for you, right? And if you are let's say you are a expert in coming up with algorithm, you want that person to lead, not somebody whose expertise is something else. So you need to allow other people to lead within your team who has a particular expertise, and hear their voice. And we talked about diversity, right? So that's also, you can look at diversity as expertise, and you want to hear other people's viewpoint when you're trying to work together because that's how you get better. What's the point of having smart people in the room if you have to act as the smartest person in the room all the time? That's not a reflection of a leadership. That's a reflection of ego, not somebody who's trying to make things better or trying to move things forward.
Yeah, and I definitely worked for those people that wanted to hire the smartest people, but then not listen to them. That is so frustrating. But yeah, one of the things that I've learned the hard way is that, as a leader, I don't scale. I can't, I can't do everybody's job for them. I have to rely on my UI UX expert, as you were saying, to do their job, and to, even if I disagree with it, I trust them because I hired them, and I have to let them make that decision and make that call.
And look, I mean, the best the scalable leaders have many teams, right? And they can set the direction, but they are constantly taking input and let them do the work they need to do. You don't want to like micromanage and critique every single thing that comes through the door, because if you do that, then you'll never scale. So I mean, like you said, that what's the point of having smart people if you're not going to listen to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've talked about, I guess a lot now, is that, as a leader, we've got to listen to those around us. We've got to be grateful for them. We've got to have empathy with them and communicate. And a lot of this goes back to just communication and transparency, and building that relationship, and that you don't want to say, like you said, you don't have to be everybody's friend, but building that solid relationship with the people that you're going to be working with on a regular basis. But what else am I missing here?
See, I think what a lot of people miss is that, everybody talks about transparency and communication and all that, but we often forget the self-leadership. It's the ability to lead yourself, right? So remember when we started the conversation by saying that, look, it takes a lot of effort to be conscious, and it takes a lot of effort to be mindful and be present at the moment, and it takes a lot of effort to be empathetic to other people's situation and how you react and how you relate to them, right? So that self-leadership is especially in today's complex environment, is probably the genesis of everything else. The communication and transparency and the process, those are all the impact. Those are the result of self. Those are not the leadership. Those are the output of leadership, right? So that self leadership is the most critical thing.
I think that's a great point to end on, and I agree 100%. I know my other aspects of leadership never seemed to really grow until I took a minute and focused on myself. And I go back to something that I've heard someone say a long time ago, is that, when you're taking a flight on an airplane, you always hear the flight attendants say that you need to put your oxygen mask on first in the event of a problem, because you can't help those beside you until you've taken care of yourself. And, I think that's one of the life skills that we always miss out on, and we don't talk about enough, is that you've got to stop and take care of yourself. You've got to, grow yourself. You've got to work on yourself a little bit too.
For sure. And I'll end on this note, which I wrote in my last book called, The Lift, is that you can't lift others till you lift yourself. You have to lift yourself if you want to lift others, right? So start lifting yourself, and then your surrounding will maybe get lifted.
I think that's perfect. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show. How can people connect with you online, learn more about the things that you're working on, and maybe pick up a copy of your book?
Thanks for having me. I mean, you can obviously follow me on LinkedIn, and I make a point to push out at least a couple of nuggets of knowledge or experience, or whatever you want to call it, every day. I regularly write blogs. You can go to my website called FaisalHoque.com, and I publish in all sorts of places. And the books are available wherever books are sold. So whether that's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Airport, you can pick up copies of my books.
Awesome. Well, it's been a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.